When I was in college and broke, I told myself to keep working hard so I can shop at J.Crew someday. But when I finally graduated, J.Crew already started closing its doors in Canada. And yes, you can still buy online, but I'm not much of an online shopper. But today, I'm in LA on a brand trip, so I decided to take a $50 Uber ride all the way to Beverly Hills from downtown LA so I can see what I've been missing out on. And when I saw the storefront, I was so excited to go in because it looked just like I remembered. I love the classic fitted silhouettes, and I always love their holiday collection because it just looks so classy. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Jen, and I make fashion commentary and fashion review content here on YouTube. I also post my own outfits on Instagram, and I make other short-form content on TikTok, so follow me there. Now let's get into the video and let's review some J.Crew. Starting with outerwear, it looks like J.Crew couldn't escape the faux leather epidemic either because this faux leather blazer was right at the front of the store. To be honest, the online ad doesn't look half bad. The blazer is fitted on the model and the material doesn't look that cheap. But in real life, it was a different story. As you can see here, there's already severe creasing at the shoulders. And this is the reason I avoid faux leather, because it creases, then it cracks, then it peels, and it just disintegrates. It is nicely lined, but for $200+, this is not worth your money. Moving on to coats. There were 2 wool coat options for women in store, and honestly, I was surprised there was any at all because we're in LA, and why would anyone buy a wool coat here? So looking at this padded top coat, this is a wool Melton coat. On the online ad, it looked quite good. I like the boxy menswear vibe that's so trendy these days. But in real life, the material was so coarse and scratchy and stiff, it was really unpleasant to touch. The coat is mostly lined, but there is a bit of exposed coarse fabric at the neck there. And if you're not wearing a turtleneck or a scarf, that's going to touch your neck and you're definitely not going to be comfortable wearing this coat. Now this coat is 97% wool with 3% polyamide, so we know it's going to be warm. And since it's wool Melton, which is a thick, dense weave, we know it's going to be water and wind resistant. The buttonholes are finished quite neatly and the buttons are reinforced, meaning there's extra thread wrapped around the base so it prevents it from falling off. And since this coat is so stiff, I would sure hope there's a vent in the back to allow for mobility. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be able to move very much in this coat. There is an inside pocket on this coat, which is considered a premium detail on women's coats, but is standard for men's coats. I know, double standards. Anyway, I want to point your attention to this red fabric here. So that red strip of fabric between the shell fabric and the lining fabric is called piping, and usually is sewn into a very narrow tube. But the piping on this jacket is extra wide for some reason, and I think it looks clumsy. And of course, we have to check the buttons on the cuff to make sure they're actually working buttons and not sewn shut. Working buttons on the cuff is going to give you more versatility because that's going to accommodate a puffier sleeve or a chunkier knit. I'm trying on a size 0 here and you can see the fit is just like in the ad, it's very stiff and boxy. Since I was in LA, I was wearing a summer outfit, so there were a few parts of the coarse material that touched my skin and I really wasn't a fan of that. For $428, this was a hard pass for me. Moving on to the Maribel top coat. I'm not sure who approved the photos for this online ad because the photo at the bottom left there makes the coat look crumpled. And for that reason, I know for sure there's synthetic in this coat, and lo and behold, there's 20% polyamide in it. This one also had the ugly wide piping on the interior, but at least there's an inside pocket and the buttons are reinforced. This coat also has a back vent, but you can see the stitching on the bottom is super messy and unflattering. I will say the back of this coat looks quite symmetrical and pretty good, and I like the contrast fabric behind the collar. Looking at the cuff, the buttons are working, but the sewing is super messy. I'm trying on a 00 and it definitely hugged me at the shoulders, but I like the shape of this one better than the last one. But for almost $400, I was not rushing to buy this coat, and it looks like the reviews agree with me. As I was wandering the store looking for things to try on, I noticed they use a lot of these really cheap looking aluminum buttons. And I know they're aluminum because the metal was so light, and honestly it just ruins the garment. But they put these buttons on everything in the store, I mean everything. So by this point I had a bad feeling and I knew whoever was in charge is trying to cut corners. Speaking of cutting corners, this Sherpa jacket was especially horrendous. I don't know whose idea was to put this faux leather detail on it, but they need to be fired. This is essentially a piece of plastic that was cut and unfinished and then sewn on, and the sewing is not even straight. It feels terrible, it's sharp, and it just cheapens the jacket so much. Moving on to their knitwear, so I started by looking at their cashmere pieces and I saw this cashmere polo. It's a brushed cashmere sweater polo, and they spent a year developing this totally unique texture. And what a big waste of money and time this is, because why was this made? When I look at this sweater, all I can think of is the horrendous pilling that's going to occur within the first few weeks of you buying this. And even if you try to use a fabric shaver to remove the pilling, now you're going to be missing chunks of this fluff. So essentially, the sweater is going to last a few weeks tops. So why would you use an expensive luxe material like cashmere to make garbage like this? And it's not priced cheaply either because it is still cashmere. And it's not just the polo they made this in, no, there's also a v-neck and other forms of this brushed cashmere. They didn't lose all scents because they had normal cashmere sweaters too, and these I actually liked. They were soft and these make a pretty good basic, especially if you catch them on sale. They also had ribbed cashmere fabric and I really like these sweaters too. But not all ribbed fabric is made the same because this ribbed turtleneck sweater in brushed yarn was horrendous. They did a good job at making the sweater look luxe on the online ad, but in real life it looks like an H&M sweater and it was so itchy. The fit was also very unflattering and you can already see the sweater is starting to pill. The neckline was also not very stretchy, so it was a pain to put on and take off. I thought that sweater was bad, but the next one's even worse. This is the Fair Isle cardigan sweater in brushed yarn. It looks pretty good on the online ad, but as soon as I saw the composition, I knew this was going to be a no-go. It contains 30% acrylic, so we know it's going to feel soft, but after a few washes, it's going to be stiff, it's going to be crumply, and it's not going to look good anymore. Funny enough, they used denser buttons for the sweater. These buttons were not aluminum, they were denser and heavier than the other buttons we've seen so far, but they're still this ugly light brush gold color. And to me, it was a strange choice to use heavier buttons on a delicate knit like this. Just as I expected, the sweater felt soft, but you can already see the texture issues and the pilling starting to occur. You couldn't pay me enough to take the sweater home. As I was browsing, I saw this black tank on the rack that pilled so badly, I thought for sure this had to be acrylic. But no, it was mostly cashmere. I was so shocked. And funny enough, on the website, it just says cashmere, but as we look on the care label, it's actually 89% cashmere and the rest is synthetic. Funny how they didn't disclose that on the website. For a tank that looks like it came from a thrift store, $90 price tag is not it. Speaking of clothes that looks like it came from the thrift, tell me this sweater doesn't look like that. And even on the online ad, they didn't bother to iron out the ribbon. To me, this type of sweater belongs on H&M, Zara, not J.Crew. The atrocities doesn't stop there because look at this skirt. It is super wrinkly, it is completely polyester, it's online so a single layer, and they're asking for $200+. What? Polyester is a fabric that's designed to be anti-wrinkle, so I have no idea why their 100% polyester skirts were so wrinkly. The only skirt that's somewhat acceptable is the suede pencil skirt. It looks just like how it does on the online ad. It was unlined on the inside, but all the seams were neatly glued down. And leather is not an easy material to work with, but they managed to make these corners look so sharp and clean. And the fit is exactly like the online ad. It was body hugging, it was the perfect length, it was pretty comfortable, and I didn't have trouble moving around in the skirt. It's not really my style, but if you're looking for something like this one's not bad. Moving on to suiting. I feel like J.Crew always did a good job with suiting, so let's hope that hasn't changed. But they use these cheap buttons on the blazers too. Why? This blazer is called Willa. It's one of their classic styles. The faux leather one we saw earlier is also a Willa. You can already see there's loose strings coming out. And same thing as the coats, the piping is extra wide and it doesn't look that great. But these buttonholes do look neat and the buttons are reinforced. This blazer has a flat pocket and the piping on top is not as straight as I've seen. The shell fabric is a mix of cotton, wool, and polyamide, which is an interesting mix because this is neither a summer blazer nor a winter blazer. And being a mostly cotton fabric, it's not going to have that same silky hand feel as a 100% wool blazer. It does have a backbend to allow for mobility, and I'm trying on a size 2 here. It looks okay, but for this price, you can get a custom blazer made. Next, we're looking at this double-breasted plaid one, even though it has the ugly gold buttons. This one also has flat pockets, and I wish they lined up the plaid pattern, but the piping on top is much straighter than the other one. On the inside, we see the same clumsy looking wide piping. Ideally, piping should be a tube shape, but this is actually a flat piece that they deliberately ironed down. The buttonhole looks alright, and they reinforced these cheap buttons as well. The composition is similar to the other one, so again, a very strange mix of cotton, wool, and polyamide, and is priced similarly as well. There's really no reason to buy these blazers at J.Crew anymore unless they're heavily discounted, because for $400, you can get a custom-made one that fits your body perfectly. Next, we're looking at this powder periwinkle blue jacket. This looks like a design student first project. The white braid detail looks like an afterthought, like it was just tacked on after the jacket has been finished. And annoyingly, they're using the same cheap looking gold buttons. The tweed also has uneven trimming. You can see it's not trimmed straight. And there are loose threads coming out everywhere. The tweed itself is really bumpy and unpleasant. And on the inside, it looks like they had extra fabric and decided to make a pocket. And a tiny pocket with no utility at that. What can you even fit in here, a quarter? On the other side of the jacket, there is a concealed pocket. I'm trying on a size 0 and you can see it looks much better from further away than close up. But it's still giving very much Zara vibes and there's no way I would pay $300 for this. After much disappointment so far, I decided to try on some fun holiday outfits. Starting with this Odette sweater with jewel buttons. They must have thought this would sell really well because they made this in a few different colors. And if you didn't know any better, you might actually go for this because the style is not bad. But it's mostly acrylic and we know that acrylic doesn't wear well and it's cheap. Avoid, avoid, avoid. When I tried it on, I don't even think it looked that good. It looked way better just lying there on the table. For $200, I really hope no one buys this. Next, we got this blue button down with the feather cuffs. I'm 99% sure they used a different shirt for the online ad because online, the feathers look much denser and fluffier. And the material of the shirt on the online ad is much thicker. The feather cuffs of this shirt in real life is just sad looking. There's barely any feathers on it. The shirt is 100% cotton, but the fabric was so thin it was paper-like. It was also very wrinkly and you can see how sheer it is. Honestly, if you just buy some feathers from the craft store, you can probably DIY this shirt. I also picked this silver sequin skirt to try on because these are really trendy. And I like that they use different sizes of sequins. I feel like it looks more luxurious. And I found the sizing to be all weird because I'm usually a size 4, but the sizes here run very big. But the smallest one they had was a size 4, so I grabbed it to try even though I knew it was going to be too big. And when you look at this skirt closer, you can see that there's extra strings and the sequins are kind of falling off. Not surprisingly, the base fabric is cheap polyester. When I tried it on, it didn't look that bad. I think from far away, this skirt kind of works. But for $200, the construction really wasn't up to par. I also picked another blue button down. Can you tell that I love blue? Anyway, this one has jewel buttons. If you just bought some jewel buttons, you can probably DIY this shirt too. But again, the material of the shirt was very thin and paper-like and really sheer too. And I think even though the jewel buttons are pretty and festive, they're way too heavy for this material. $148, I would rather spend $10 at the thrift, buy a men's blue button down, and change the buttons myself. Now we're moving on to this tweed dress. It has the same jewel buttons as we've seen before, but it looks like there's already snags in the tweed. And that's a problem with chunky, uneven tweed like this. It's prone to snagging and it's not going to look good after a few wears. Good quality tweed is smooth and lustrous. This is Zara tweed. The buttons on the front of this dress were sewn shut. These are not real working buttons. To an extent, I actually understand this decision because you don't want any gaping at the front of the dress. The zipper at the back is nice and long, so it was easy to put on and take off. I really appreciated that detail. The fabric is a mix of wool and polyester with mostly wool. And this is pretty standard because tweed is usually a mix of different fibers. And this dress actually looked better from far away than it does up close. Because from far away, you can't see the snags, the bumpy textures. And that's probably why I was so excited when I was at the storefront because J.Crew makes clothes that look good from far away only. Of course, I had to try on and review a pair of trousers as well. So I picked this wool twill kind of fabric type of trouser. And this pair was actually pretty good. You can see the sewing on the inside is very neat, the stitches are small, the sewing is straight. There's bias tape at the zipper and even the smaller button is reinforced. This is a wool and polyester mix with 2% elasting for stretch. So I'm definitely not a fan. I would prefer 100% wool or 98% wool with some elasting. But I was pleasantly surprised to see that this pair of pants is fully lined. So despite the material not being 100% wool, they knew there was a possibility it might feel itchy. So they went ahead and lined the pants. Great choice. But again, not a fan of these cheap gold buttons. Despite that, the flap on that little pocket looks quite neat. The waistband looks quite neat as well, as do the pockets. In terms of fit, I actually like the way they drape. It was definitely a little long on me, but I can see the potential. I also picked up a pair of jeans to try on. So this one does have a raw edge at the bottom, but they did do a line of stitches around the raw edge so that the raw edge wouldn't become more unraveled. They did take the time to trim off the extra fabric on the inside. Otherwise, the sewing looks pretty standard. And the composition is standard as well, 99% cotton with 1% elastic for stretch. They had this faux leather piece on the back for the branding, which I wasn't really a fan of. It felt kind of cheap. But I actually quite like the fit of these. I thought they were the perfect amount of cropped. I like the shape. I thought they were quite flattering, so this is something I would definitely consider buying. I didn't get a chance to look too much into the fashion jewelry and shoes, but it looked like a pretty good selection. And that concludes the J. Crew review. The quality that I saw today is definitely not the J. Crew that I remember. It's very obvious that there's lots of corners that are being cut, but the prices have stayed the same. After seeing this, I'm not upset they left Canada at all. You can get very similar styles, probably better made, at Banana Republic. Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you still shop at J. Crew? And let me know what other brands you guys would like to see me review, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!